The decade of the 1850s was one of the most turbulent in American history. The fragile balance between free and slave states was unraveling, and efforts to compromise only led to deeper conflict. In this episode, we explore how violence in Kansas shocked the nation and how a relatively unknown lawyer from Illinois began his rise to national prominence. By the early 1850s, the uneasy balance between slave and free states was already under pressure. Westward expansion raised the question once again: as new territories entered the Union, would they allow slavery or prohibit it? The Missouri Compromise of 1820 had provided a clear rule: slavery was banned in most of the Louisiana Territory north of the 36-30 line. For over 3 decades, that compromise helped limit sectional conflict. But as the 1850s unfolded, political leaders began to challenge it. To many Northerners, this was a betrayal. They saw it as an attempt by pro-slavery interests to expand their influence. For Southerners, the Kansas-Nebraska Act was a victory. It offered them the chance to extend slavery into territories that had been closed to it for decades. Each new slave state meant additional representation in Congress, which could protect Southern interests against the growing population of the free states. The passage of the act in May 1854 had immediate consequences. It shattered the Whig Party, one of the 2 major political parties of the time. Many anti-slavery Whigs and Democrats abandoned their old affiliations and helped to form a new political movement, the Republican Party, dedicated to stopping the expansion of slavery. The law did not settle the matter peacefully. Instead, it opened the door to conflict. Both pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers rushed into Kansas, determined to control its future. What followed was a period of chaos and violence. Kansas became a battleground between the 2 factions. Elections were marred by fraud, intimidation, and armed groups from both sides. Rival governments were established, one supporting slavery, the other opposing it. Clashes soon turned violent. In 1856, pro-slavery forces attacked the town of Lawrence, an anti-slavery stronghold. In response, the radical abolitionist John Brown led a retaliatory attack at Pottawatomie Creek, brutally killing several pro-slavery settlers. These acts of violence shocked the nation, and the territory earned the grim nickname Bleeding Kansas. The events in Kansas made it clear that compromise was failing. The political system seemed unable to contain the conflict, and ordinary citizens were taking matters into their own hands. The tensions weren't confined to the territories, they spilled over into the halls of Congress itself. In May 1856, Senator Charles Sumner of Massachusetts delivered a fiery speech condemning slavery and its supporters. Days later, Representative Preston Brooks of South Carolina attacked him on the Senate floor with a cane, nearly killing him. The beating of Sumner became a symbol of the nation's divisions. Northerners saw it as evidence of Southern brutality, while Southerners celebrated Brooks as a defender of their honor. The breakdown of civil discourse was becoming undeniable. Just as Kansas remained unsettled, the Supreme Court handed down a ruling that deepened the crisis. In 1857, the Dred Scott decision declared that African Americans, whether enslaved or free, could not be citizens, and that Congress had no authority to prohibit slavery in the territories. The decision opened all Western lands to slavery, convincing Northerners that the federal government was controlled by slaveholding interests. Southerners saw it as confirmation and protection of their constitutional rights regarding slavery. While Kansas burned and Congress descended into violence, another figure was beginning to step onto the national stage. Abraham Lincoln, at the start of the 1850s, was still a relatively unknown lawyer from Springfield, Illinois. He had served a single term in the U.S. House of Representatives in the late 1840s, but had largely returned to private law practice. Yet the deepening crisis over slavery drew him back into politics. He did not call for the immediate end of slavery everywhere, and he was cautious in how he framed his opposition. What defined him was a clear stance against the expansion of slavery into new territories. He believed that the Founding Fathers had tolerated slavery where it already existed as a necessary evil, but they never intended it to spread across the continent. For Lincoln, halting the spread of slavery was essential if the Union was to survive. His opportunity to reach a larger audience came in 1858 when he challenged Stephen A. Douglas for his Illinois Senate seat. Douglas, already a nationally prominent figure, was the architect of the Kansas-Nebraska Act and a firm believer in popular sovereignty. Lincoln, by contrast, argued that popular sovereignty had failed and that the nation faced a moral and political crisis. The two men agreed to a series of debates across Illinois, which became known as the Lincoln-Douglas debates. These events drew large crowds and received national press coverage. Douglas defended the right of each territory to decide slavery for itself, even if it meant tolerating its expansion. Lincoln countered that slavery was a moral wrong and that the United States could not endure permanently divided between free states and slave states. One of Lincoln's most memorable statements came at the beginning of his campaign when he declared, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." His words resonated with many in the North who feared that the Dred Scott decision and the spread of slavery threatened the nation's future. Although Lincoln ultimately lost the Senate election to Douglas, the debates transformed his reputation. He was no longer just a regional lawyer. He had become a recognized national figure, known for his sharp intellect, calm reasoning, and moral clarity. The Republican Party, still a relatively new force in American politics, saw in him a leader who could articulate their vision in a way that appealed to a broad audience. By the end of the 1850s, Lincoln had positioned himself as one of the most important voices against the expansion of slavery.